that power plant provided 30% of the baseload power for the utility. It was an essential part of the mix in this city. So a lot has changed since then, a lot on the politics, some on the technology. But so now we've torn down this very important piece of the puzzle here in Colorado Springs, and we're really in uncharted territory.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to another episode of PowerGab, your go-to show for all things energy and environmental policy in the state of Colorado. I'm co-host Jake Fogleman, joined as always by my co-host Amy Cooke.
In studio
today. In studio this time.
Listen, I escaped the heat and humidity of North Carolina.
Yep, just to come back to the heat, the dry heat, as you remind us, of Colorado.
It's a dry heat.
This episode is going to be a little bit different. A lot of the times, PowerGab listeners have probably picked up, we talk about Xcel a lot. Xcel is the largest monopoly utility in the state of Colorado, so it's a big topic of discussion. But it is by no means the only player in the energy space. There are millions of people all across the state that use different energy providers, and one of them is going to be our focus of conversation today. It's a different type of utility. It's not a monopoly investor-owned utility.
Right.
It is a municipal utility. So if Amy, you want to give us a little background on what that means.
So we talk about Xcel for a couple of reasons. One, obviously, it is the largest provider of power generation in the state, right? Also owns, when they're a monopoly, when they're a vertically integrated monopoly, they own usually most of the generation, the transmission lines and the distribution system. So they own all of that, and then ratepayers pay for it. But there are other ways, as Jake pointed out, there are other ways, or there are other providers. Rural parts of the state are served by co-ops, which are, rural electric cooperatives. It was groups that came together because these large power providers wouldn't serve rural communities, because when you do the cost per mile, it's expensive. So people that lived in rural areas got together, and they have these things called co-ops. So and I don't know what the breakdown is, and at some point we'll have to have a show on that. But there are the rural areas, a significant portion of the rural areas are serviced by co-ops. Xcel, for instance, does Denver, Greeley, kind of Front Range-ish, and Grand Junction. But there's another provider along the Front Range. We have one in Fort Collins and Loveland. And then we have a larger one, I believe, and I could be wrong on this, and our guest can correct that, but it's Colorado Springs Utility. And we've actually gotten some questions about the Colorado Springs Utility. Well, what is it? It's a municipal. And the reason why we're talking about this today is also, and why we bring up Xcel. Xcel isn't just the largest provider, it's also a driver of policy in the state. So it used to be that you'd say, okay, well, Xcel is going to do something. It's advancing a policy. It'll only impact the investor-owned utilities like Xcel or like Black Hills, which is another investor-owned utility. Well, now the entire state has fallen under this Polis plan of 100% renewable by 2040. I know he's changed the phrase of that a little bit because he's realized he can't quite get there with his renewables, but that's still the goal. So the municipal utility, Colorado Springs Utility, is a municipal. It's owned by the community there. It's owned by the taxpayers. They're the ones that pay for it. And it services about 253,000 residents in that area. It's got, looking at their portfolio of generation, about 70% is natural gas, 28% is coal, and then the rest of it, there's a little hydro in there, and there's a smattering of wind and solar. And the reason why we're having this conversation today is is the closure of the Martin Drake facility, which was their big power plant in downtown Colorado Springs, and the other one is their CEO, the person heading up the Colorado Springs Utility, is Travas, and he's made some what I would call honest statements to the media. He's been pretty honest about it. But to talk about it, I'm really excited to have today's guest. We have Sean Paige, and he's a name that people in Colorado know. He has talked about energy in a lot, and for many years, although he's very young. I don't know, you must have started when you were a mere child, Sean. He was a former Colorado Springs City Councilman. He was a board member of the Colorado Springs Utility. If you hear the acronym CSU, we're talking about Colorado Springs Utility. He was also the opinion page editor at the Gazette. So Sean is well known around the state. He's also well known on energy issues because it's been a passion of his, an issue that has been near and dear to his heart. Sean, welcome to the show. Thanks. I don't know what else I forgot. Feel free to add it. But I think you were involved in some of the conversations about the Martin Drake facility. Talk about that and what Martin Drake meant to Colorado Springs and what during your time on the utility board, what you were doing with Martin Drake, which has subsequently been retired.
Yeah, it's in ruins right now, even as we speak. It's been torn down. It's an interesting trajectory an interesting story because I was on the board between 2009 and 2011. Because I sat on the city council, you do double duty in this town as the utility board. And I often felt most uncomfortable making utility decisions. I think the city council decisions were relatively easy compared to the utility decisions. It was a $1 billion a year company at that point when I was there, and I'm sure it does a lot more business and is much bigger today. At the time, just for context, we weren't talking about tearing down Martin Drake. We were talking about extending its life, maybe indefinitely. At the time that I was on the board, we invested a lot of money in a very cutting-edge technology called Newman Systems, which was homegrown. It was developed by a guy here. So we thought it had a lot of potential because the assumption at that point, which was, again, not that long ago, at least from my perspective, was that coal might be dirty, according to the environmental lobby, but it was here to stay for a long period of time, and we just needed the right scrubbing technology. So the assumption was Martin Drake would live on for 50 more years at least, and we were developing the technology to do that. The ground obviously shifted under our feet, even as we were making those decisions in two big ways. One, Obama's war on coal, even though his clean energy plan ultimately failed and was thrown out by court, it succeeded on a lot of other levels. And the media, the chattering classes, the environmental lobby just determined that to achieve their climate goals, they had to hang a pelt on the wall. And the pelt that they wanted to hang on the wall was an entire industry called the coal industry. So the war on coal, the other shift that occurred right when I was on the board was the fracking revolution, which also increased greatly our access to natural gas. So it sort of, the logic of it was, okay, maybe we can move more to natural gas. But at the time that I was on the board, Martin Drake downtown, that power plant provided 30% of the baseload power for the utility. It was a essential part of the mix in this city. So a lot has changed since then, a lot on the politics, some on the technology. But so now we've torn down this very important piece of the puzzle here in Colorado Springs, and we're really in uncharted territory, just as the country is entering uncharted territory, just as the state of Texas has entered uncharted territory when it invests, in my view, overly heavily in not ready for prime time, unreliable renewables while jettisoning the traditional workhorses of our energy grid, I think precipitously. So yeah, we've come a long way, not necessarily in a good way. As you mentioned, Amy, yes, Colorado Springs is the second largest utility in the state. It is owned by the citizens of Colorado Springs, and it's run by the city council, an arrangement that I've never totally been comfortable with, including when I was making those decisions, because those are highly technical, highly impactful decisions. The decisions I made as a utility board member were hugely more impactful than the decisions I was making as a city councilman. But the utility board is often kind of this forgotten entity. Oh yeah, I'm on city council. Oh, and I also happen to be managing or helping make decisions for $1 billion a year energy company that impacts everything. It's not just energy in Colorado Springs, it's also water. And we were making decisions then. This isn't a show about water policy, but it's hugely impactful. And that arrangement, I don't know what a better arrangement is, but I think that arrangement is fraught with peril because you have politicians, amateurs, including myself at the time. I had written a little bit about energy, but writing about energy and making ratepayer decisions is a whole different sort of thing. So you have a bunch of part-time amateurs who get paid. I think I got paid $6,000 a year when I was on city council, making monumental decisions about an energy company running an energy company. And I've never been totally comfortable with that. I don't have an easy answer for what the answer is in terms of fixing it, but it's part of the problem that we've gotten ourselves into at a microcosmic level here at Colorado Springs. But if you look at it in Texas and the nation as a whole, is we've got politicians making decisions based on whim and fantasy about very important energy issues that impact millions of people's lives and pocketbooks every day.
Hey, Sean, I think Travas Deal is the one who's having to reckon with a lot of the, you all were able to make decisions, but now the state is making decisions for you. And Jake, you found some comments that the head of CSU made recently.
Yeah, I think it was a great point that, CSU is, yes, it's not the same type of utility, but it's subject to a lot of the same rules that Colorado's other utilities are going through.
Yes.
We've covered Xcel having to go through the energy or the electric resource plan, the clean energy plan, that sort of thing. And CSU has had to undergo something similar. And I came across a Gazette article, a news article about this, and I noticed that CSU's CEO was making some rather candid comments on the record about what this is going to mean for ratepayers' pocketbooks. So I did a little digging. I'm not an expert on CSU, so I did a little digging on the website, and I found that their CEO, Travas Deal, actually did an entire blog post after the Greenhouse Gas Roadmap 2.0 was released by the Polis administration earlier this year, where he is remarkably candid about. It talks about how this has forced us already to retire the Martin Drake power plant. In 2022 is when it officially went offline. It's clear under the roadmap, he says, that you can't have any more coal on the grid by 2030. So I believe it's the Ray Nixon is the other coal power plant that's going to have to be shut down. And then he talks about additional carbon emissions are expected. And he says, with one-party control in the Colorado legislature and influential environmental voices, this week's update is an indication that the state will continue to place pressure on a variety of industries, including energy providers like us, to reduce carbon emissions. And then he says, the roadmap now calls for 100% clean electric generation by 2040. And while well-intentioned, this would place unprecedented financial burdens on customers while jeopardizing service reliability for our community and military installations. For these reasons, it is not a direction we support, and we will do everything possible to change this expectation. That is remarkable to hear from, I contrast this a lot with the other utility we've been talking about, Xcel, where their CEO, every time a new policy comes down, he's, this is a great opportunity for us to lead the way in this energy transition, and it's actually going to save ratepayers money. We can't wait to be at the forefront of our commitment to 100% greenhouse gas reductions. And so to see a CEO say, actually, this is going to be devastating to our ratepayers, and it's actually going to potentially put the grid at a reliability risk is, I think, remarkable.
Yeah, and Sean, I want to ask you this. So Deal went on to say, the CEO, Travas Deal, went on to say that between 2025, I think it was, and let me check my notes.
I believe 2029.
Yeah, 2025 and 2029, that 253,000 customers in Colorado Springs will have to pay $3 billion. And he said at least half of that is to essentially accommodate this Polis plan. Now, $3 billion among 253,000 people is about $12,000 per customer. Now, I got to believe that if you were on the CSU board, you would actually probably like to be there now so you could make decisions saying, well, we're not going to get there. We can't settle, because the difference is all of your customers have to pay for that. I mean,
Yeah,
you have
of
nowhere
course.
else to go. There's nowhere else to go.
No, we don't. And I admire his candor. I don't know Travas. I've known a number of other CSU directors over the year. I admire his candor, and I'm glad he's ringing the bell and sounding the alarm. The problem is we're so far down this road, and it's a runaway train, and it's driven by politics. And Colorado Springs is a home ruled city, but that doesn't immunize you against the regulatory pressures that come to bear at the state and the federal level. So people within we can argue about whether they've been well led at CSU over the years, and also whether the board of CSU, which has changed with the political winds depending on who's on city council, has been complicit and somewhat responsible in all this. Maybe had they sounded the alarm years ago, maybe more pressure could have been brought. You got to remember, this trajectory that the state is on dates back to 2004 with Amendment 37. That was the renewable portfolio standards that were approved by voters. Now, you look back on that, it was modest. It was 20%, right?
No, it was 10.
That seems.
It was 10.
Yeah, that's true. 10%. Good call, Amy. Then in 2007, it was jacked up to 20%.
Yep.
Then in 2010, it went up to 30%. Then Polis comes in and the train just keeps running. Now, remember, all these decisions were made without any cost benefit analysis, no real study. It is the height of irresponsibility to be just throwing numbers up against the wall and saying, oh, we can do this. We've gone to the moon. We have the technology. We can do all this stuff. And then after Polis came in, and the legislature got involved, then we went from 30% in 2010. Now we're up to 29. Then we're up to 50%. Then we're up to 96. Now we've gone to 100. And without a vote of the people, the initial, the camel under the camel's nose under the tent was Amendment 37. But since then, it's been a runaway train. And now we're going to pay the piper. Everybody who had come.
Let's look at this from Colorado Springs. And I'm sorry, Jake, you may have a question in here too. Let's throw. It's not just $12,000 per rate. It's in everything.
Right. Yeah.
So the cost of living in Colorado Springs does what?
I was going to say, this is obviously a hot topic on this podcast. We talk about energy is the economy. Energy is an input into everything that you do. So it touches businesses, it touches your everyday commuter, it touches everything. That kind of was going to lead me into my question. Travis Deal, the current CEO, talks a lot about what this means for ratepayers. It seems like, and I'm curious to hear your experience when you were a board member, how much were ratepayers on your mind when you were making these kinds of decisions, and compare that to today, where it seems like ratepayers perhaps are an afterthought behind this broader vision of transformation of the grid?
And did they ever show up to any of your meetings?
Yeah. Well, that's a whole nother issue. Both the city council and the utility board meet conveniently in the middle of the day. I fought this. I fought hard to move those meetings to the night even when I was on council. It worked for me because I was a lone wolf. I could do what I wanted. But no, they'll show up every once in a while when an ox gets gored. The problem is with all this stuff, it happens gradually. Oh, we're going to raise it by 40% by 2040. People like, oh, okay, maybe so. But when the problem is when the bite comes and when the costs for all this come and the chickens come home to roost, years have gone by. And it's very hard for people who aren't paying very close attention to link their ratepayer impacts with what happened at the ballot box back in 2004. And that's a problem. People don't connect the dots very well in our society anymore between regulatory causes and market effects, what they're paying for what happened years ago or decisions were made. So then it's just easy to bash the utility. And look, I'm a basher of XL myself sometimes. I'm a basher of Colorado Springs sometimes. But, it's a mix of things that are going on here. But the regulatory impacts, you mentioned earlier about, I saw a pie chart that's very fresh. It was on some financial papers that the finance committee of the board was looking at just days ago. And just to give you a sense, the pie chart I saw is a 5-year budget by category going forward of about $2 billion. Now, of that pie chart, about 19% of the increased cost in the next 5 years, it was a 5-year look forward, about 19% is to accommodate growth. And growth meaning population growth, the increase in use of electronic devices. We've got data centers here, speaking of costs. We've got some high energy consuming industries here, and we're trying to bring them all the time here, more data centers. Anyway, of the pie chart that I saw, which was, again, it totaled about 2 billion, 45% of that pie chart, which was 905 million, was caught up in regulatory compliance, meaning regulations. So half those increases over the next 5 years are, and then the other half, another 23%, falls under the rubric of reliability. Well, because you're sophisticated, understand one of the problems why we're having to spend so much on reliability is, again, because of the regulatory climate, and the reliability falls and suffers when we put too many unreliable renewables into the mix too fast. So, and then we have other costs. A lot of these costs, okay, we have to go out and fortify transmission systems because Colorado Springs Utility no longer can provide its own baseload power. It tore down Martin Drake. It's added all these unrenewables. So they have to go out and buy it off the spot market. And they're got to go to regional power providers to do that. And to access those regional power providers, you got to build more transmission. So all these things, so many of these things, of the $2 billion pie chart I saw, I would bet you easily 80% of that is related to this, not 45%, because the reliability impacts, these renewables impact reliability, and that forces you to go outside your own system. Colorado Springs used to be pretty self-sufficient. Now we're going to rely on other power providers. And when the pinch comes, when you have a regional cold snap or a regional heat wave, and everybody is sucking energy from the same straw, you're going to get slammed. This is what happened to Texas, right? In the famous cold snap and heat waves, you are going to get bent over back. You're going to be bent over forwards every time we have to go to those regional power providers to meet our needs, which we never had to do before.
And Sean, that's assuming that they have the power. I mean, that's the other thing. If you're all sucking from the same straw, to use your words, sometimes you'll pay whatever the spot price is because you need the power. But if the power isn't there, so real quick, and I know we're running out of time, but
yeah.
The impact on Colorado Springs is going to be significant. And Travis Deal seems to be doing everything he can to wave the flag. What does this look like we're in 2024, 2028, when some of the big bills he's saying this between 2025 and 2029. What does it look like in Colorado Springs?
It's going to be devastating. It's going to really hit us hard. And, and none of this will stop until we change political leadership. This isn't a political program. I'm not trying to get partisan, but the train really started running off the tracks when Polis came along. And then this thing just went crazy. I don't know, until people, it's not just a Colorado Springs problem, until people in Colorado wake up and realize that there is a correlation between the increases they're seeing on their utility bills and the mandates that our politicians are handing down willy-nilly without any cost-benefit analysis and just throwing them out there, and then they leave the office and somebody's left to pay the bill later. It's outrageous. It's irresponsible, and it's dangerous. You know, I don't remember not too long ago when we had heat waves and cold snaps that the governor would be issuing tweets telling you to close your curtains and turn down your thermostat and all this crap. Why? Because the grid, though, you know, you could have failures here and there, but overall, nobody worried about this stuff. It was reliable. People in Colorado have to ask themselves a very important question. Why? Just not too long ago, you had a reliable grid and an affordable grid, and all of a sudden today you don't. If you don't connect the dots between that and what's happening at the State House and in Washington and in the Capitol, then you're really missing the boat and you're not connecting the right dots.
That's a great point about introducing fragility into the system by a policy choice. We're coming up on time here. I want to leave one more point about where we're headed, where Colorado Springs is headed, because based on this plan, Amy, at the lead of the show, you started with the fact that they're about 80% fossil fuels right now, about 80% baseload reliable power. Well, evidently, that's going to shrink to 17% natural gas, primarily peaking resources, which we've covered are less efficient and more expensive to run because you have to ramp them up at a moment's notice, and it's hard on a machine. 26% solar, 33% wind, another 5% hydro, and to Sean's point, they've allocated about 16 to 17% spot market purchases, just assuming that power is going to be there. So that's the 2030 plan. That's where they're headed in terms of a resource mix, and we will see if they are successful. But I'll kick it over to you, Amy, for our 3 takeaways from this show. What did you get from this episode?
Well, once again, wind and solar are supposedly free resources. They're super expensive electricity, and it's in everything. Colorado Springs is going to pay $12,000 per customer, but that's going to be magnified with every, it's in everything. It's in your food, it's in your deliveries, it's in everything. It isn't going to just be $12,000. So multiply that. So it's going to get more expensive. And then something that Sean brought up, and we've talked a little bit about this. Did anybody vote for this? There were no cost-benefit analysis. So it's going to be expensive. You didn't vote for it. And then the last thing, because of the reliability issue, get your generator.
Always the evergreen advice. Sean, we want to thank you for coming on and joining us here on this episode of PowerGab. Listeners, we hope you enjoyed it as well. If you like the show, make sure you head on over to iitv.org for our entire video back catalog. Our episodes are also available wherever you get your audio podcasts, whether that's Spotify or Apple. And if you want to suggest future guest topics or show topics, feel free to reach out to us at info@powergab.org. But until next week, we'll see you.